And welcome back, folks, to Truth versus News from Tahiti. I'm Don. I had a great little dip here, but back to things. Truth versus News for July 9th, no, July 13th. And all kinds of things have been happening here, folks. This is Monday, and it's going to be quite a week. So let's get back to it. Jim, what you got?
Thanks, Don. Well, the beat goes on. I pledge allegiance to the mask of the World Health Organization and to the United Nations, for which it stands, one world under lockdown, with mandatory vaccination for all. That's the way it's shaping out.
Yep.
Meanwhile, we have a sheriff calling Governor Inslee an idiot, declaring no crisis should ever violate a citizen's liberty or God-given rights. Kickatuk County, Washington Sheriff Bob Songer calls Governor Inslee an idiot, and on his website declares, no crisis should ever violate a citizen's liberty or God-given rights under the U.S. Constitution or the Washington State Constitution. Meanwhile, Dan Bongino, you can take your mask mandate and shove it right up where the sun doesn't shine, vowing to defy the mask order. The conservative radio host, Don Bongino, vowed to defy officials who passed a mandatory mask order this week in his county of residence. He took a shot across the bow to Martin County, Florida commissioner who voted 5-0 pass an ordinance after a lengthy Tuesday meeting that saw most residents in attendance opposing the mandate. If you watch the wording, however, in a number of these cases, they've changed it from face mask to face covering. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy said Wednesday he will sign an executive order requiring residents and visitors to the state to wear face coverings. Colorado City to mandate corona face coverings. Decatur City Council passing Vass's face covering ordinance. Who else wears a face covering in public? Think Sharia. Very interesting. Meanwhile, Raul Diego, mass tracking COVID pass immunity passport slated to roll out in 15 countries. COVID pass will determine whether you can go to a restaurant if you need a medical test or are due for a talking to by authorities in a post-COVID world. Consent is voluntary, but enforcement will be compulsory. Through the magic of internet meme culture, most millennials will be familiar with the famous opening scene of the 1942 film Casablanca, where two policemen stop a civilian in the old Moorish section of Nazi-occupied French Morocco and ask him for his papers. The subject is taken away at once after failing to produce the required documents. The cinematic exchange has never been used ever since as a popular reference to the ever-encroaching hand of the state, which is now on the verge of attaining a level of control over people's movements that puts the crude Nazi methods to shame. I think that's the case. Scott, very disturbing.
It is, Jim. Can you hear me?
Yes.
A little louder.
Yeah, I think it is. We're witnessing again sort of an unrattling and unraveling and a nervous predisposition to try and throw in chaos and disruption and confusion where we are seeing this as a war footing. This is seeing this once again as part of a massive psychological warfare information operation campaign. And the more, like, for example, the more people start to pick up on this, you're going to see the leads, as the media is very, very fond of saying, the lead between Biden and Trump is 13 points. Well, it's coming out that lead is slowly falling down more and more as people begin to digest and define all of these things that are activating and assigning them to Biden for full blame. Jim?
Actually, more accurate poll suggests it's tied nationally 47-47, which means Trump is well in the lead because he's historically undercounted by anywhere from 5 to 7 or more points by Trump voters who don't want to participate in polls for a host of various reasons. But I get that from a friend of mine who's an expert on polling and very active in the Republican Party today. Meanwhile, Ilhan Omar calls for a whole American political economic system to be dismantled because of oppression. Progressive Democrat Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota calls for the dismantling of the entire American economic and political system, calling it a system of oppression. As long as our economy and political systems prioritize profit without considering who is profiting, who is being shut out, we will perpetuate this inequality. She said Tuesday afternoon, we cannot stop at criminal justice system. We must begin the work of dismantling the whole system of oppression wherever we find it. Marsha Blackburn calls for Ilhan Omar to resign as a threat to our democracy. Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn calling on Representative Omar to resign after the squad member called for dismantling the American political and economic system. She claimed both systems, economic and political, are forms of oppression in America and must be taken apart. But the fact is, she's a sitting member of Congress actively calling for the toppling of the American system of economics, politics, and law is not a matter so easily dismissed. We know Omar hates America, but this call is a means to actively cause damage to our nation, and it's a direct violation of her oath of office. Blackburn called her out almost immediately. Ilhan Omar took an oath to defend and protect the Constitution, not alter it. Omar and her Marxist comrades are a threat to our democracy. Omar should resign.
Yep.
She took an oath, after all, not to shred it. When Joe Biden tweets, we won't just rebuild this nation, we'll transform it. Exactly what does he have in mind? Newt Gingrich tweets. His July 4th speech indicates he thinks radical change is needed, re-educating the rest of us into his newfound left-wing values, none of which he believed before. Scott, your thoughts again?
Yeah, we're Ilhan Omar represented so much, and so did Ocasio-Cortez. They're attractive young women. They have a lot of physical appeal, and they are somewhat sharp, but they take such a dour, negative, hostile position and opinion, and such a passive aggressive, if not blatant, violence against the country and dismantling it, and their rhetoric is so dripping with poison that they alienate themselves from, again, the independents which determine all elections. So they're like a flash in the pan. They're going to be very passing. They don't represent anything of substance, and they really are evaporating their charm under the thuggish brutality of their feminazi ways. And I think Ilhan Omar is going to be indicted for fraud, for crimes in marrying her brother, committing visa fraud to bring him into the country, and then having the gall to run for Congress. I think the crime is there and the evidence is there, and Judicial Watch and others have been reviewing it. So Ilhan Omar very easily could receive an indictment and be prosecuted for visa fraud. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think, may even end up losing in her district because, again, she's damaged her district for her far left ideology, and you see that in the prohibitions against Amazon or these other big companies that might be there. Her fantasy of economic, companies need to be kept shut down, or else this will be an economic win for Trump, and we have to get rid of him at all costs. So that means, people have to go out of business, people have to go hungry, people have to miss their house payments, people have to be thrown out on the streets for the greater good of the Communist Manifesto agenda that she's pursuing. That's not what Americans will tolerate. And again, they'll be lucky if they escape with their lives, because they are pushing the American people. They are weaponizing government, and they're weaponizing the COVID-19. They're weaponizing mask wearing. They're weaponizing executive orders by the governor, which means they're using these weapons in the civil war assault on the American people and assault on their freedoms. When people are assaulted, they defend themselves with deadly force in many regards. And I think that day is coming for all of these far-left politicians who haven't learned their lesson, and that is, when you overstep your bounds, some people are going to push you back harder and farther and with lethal effectiveness that you'll never recover from. Jim?
Well, you know, Scott, for a long time, I felt that the squad was making a valuable contribution to society with a diverse political point of view. I liked AOC. She seemed rather charming in a slightly eccentric way. Ilhan Omar seemed to me very outspoken, but when they reached the point of sabotaging the Constitution and the American government, that's beyond the pale, and I no longer support them. It didn't even bother me much about her having committed this fraud of bringing in her brother by way of a fake marriage, but this to me is just too much, and I no longer am sympathetic to either of them. Don, you wanted to add a thought?
All I say is, amen. You're right. They should not represent their congressional district. They certainly don't represent their oath, and that's treason, folks. And they should be out of there. So sooner the better, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for reform, but this business of revolution. Here we have shock videos, Black Lives Matter harassing Christians attending church. This is a bit much. Mother and children accosted while attempting to enter church. In one video, protesters are seen exiting a church, exclaiming profanities and chanting Black Lives Matter before a fight nearby nearly breaks out. Eventually, two police officers inside the church are able to de-escalate the situation, and the protesters exit peacefully. In another, a mother and her three children are yelled at by dozens of BLM protesters attempting to enter a church. Why are you bringing a baby to a church? Yells a BLM protester over a bullhorn before a chant starts to save those kids. I mean, this is absurd. After the family walks up the steps of the church, several church members converge on the walkway to block BLM protesters from following behind. The harassment of Christian churchgoers no doubt represents an escalation of tactics for the BLM movement, but it's par for the course for radical leftists who align themselves with Marx and the godless Chi-Coms. Meanwhile, Don Lemon lectures Terry Crews, Black Lives Matter doesn't care about all Black lives. Right. It's very odd. CNN anchor Don Lemon lectured Terry Crews over the actor's previous statements about Black Lives Matter, suggesting the movement really isn't about all Black lives. Lemon at one point told him he needed a thicker skin. I have skin as tough as an armadillo, suggesting the group is and should be solely focused on police brutality, not black on black crime. Crews initially reiterated comments that by not working with the white community, BLM is simply their own supremacist group. When you have the leaders of the BLM movement who are now talking about if we don't get our demand, we're going to burn it down, other Black people are talking about working with other whites and other races. They're being viewed as sellouts or called Uncle Toms. You start to understand you are now being controlled. You're not being treated as loved. You're actually being controlled. Someone wants to control the narrative. It was almost a supremacist views where they viewed their Black Lives Matter a lot more than mine. Absolutely. Got it 100% correct. Growing increasingly indignant, Lemon tells Crews that BLM should not care about black on black crime since it's not in their mission, and tells his guests to start that organization himself. He also compared it to saying cancer matters, and people are asking, what about HIV? Meanwhile, Atlanta mayor delivers the harsh truth to BLM. We're doing each other more harm than any police officer.
That's right.
The debate surrounding Black Lives Matter and law enforcement rages nationwide, also resulting in more spikes in violence across the country. Via the Daily Wire, we talk a lot about what we're demanding from our officers in our communities, observed the mayor. We've protested, we've demonstrated, we've been angry, we've cried, we've demanded action. Well, now we're demanding action for Sequoia Turner and for all of the other people who were shot in Atlanta last night and over past weeks, because the reality is this: these aren't police officers shooting people on the streets of Atlanta. These are members of the community shooting each other. And in this case, it's the worst possible outcome. I think she got it right, Scott, but Black Lives Matter has an agenda and they could care less.
Well, their agenda is going to be throttled and disintegrated and repelled. They are out of their league for a variety of reasons. You know, this Black Lives Matter, the Antifa group that has hijacked them, they're not supported by blacks. You're going to see an alternative to Black Lives Matter rising up with a Martin Luther King, Malcolm X sort of flavor that rejects the idiocy of warmongering rhetoric of the Black Panther, Black Lives Matter types that are out there with hiring crisis actors incidentally, and I think that's something that warrants more investigation and exposure. But you're going to see a rise of a black alternative political and rhetorical presence that challenges all of this nonsense to say, you know what, Black Lives Matter, but so do white lives, so do Hispanic lives, and so do Asian lives. And we as productive citizens need to work together. And, you know, in a sense, they have to abandon the niggardly ways that Bill Cosby described and Colin Powell described, and many other blacks have described. You do not succeed and advance in society when you are covered in tattoos, you wear your pants down, halfway down your buttocks, and you engage in this thuggish, gang-like demeanor and vocabulary. You're just consigning yourself to a life of destitution, misery, and ultimate death. That's why Chicago has all of these problems. That's why all the Democrat cities have these problems, because they encourage that sort of mentality that establishes blacks in sort of a self-imposed state of slavery. And that's the first thing that needs to be abandoned. That's what, in a sense, Malcolm X, that's what Louis Farrakhan has done with many of the blacks. They've cleaned them up. They've put them into a responsible organizations, and in a sense made them accountable to each other. And there's been a very constructive social advance that's come to the black community because of the Farrakhan movement and other things. That's not to make an excuse for some of the other hostile, toxic things that he said. I'm putting that aside. I'm compartmentalizing and looking to the constructive elements of what happens when you organize young black men around certain moral values of not having children without wedlock and not engaging in self-destructive behaviors. But the white liberal leftists and Antifa types, these lesbian bull dykes and these other fanatical anarchists that are going to churches and yelling and screaming, I think they really need to be exposed as the domestic terrorists they are, prosecuted as the domestic terrorists they are, shot in self-defense when they approach and try and shoot individual citizens. That day is coming. Yep. Because they're picking fights with a population that even the Emperor of Japan warned, I won't go into America because every blade of grass has a gun behind it. And that still maintains itself. And when the BLM, these Antifa types go in and start trying to take violence out, they're going to find they meet a very violent end very quickly. And I think that day is coming, as we saw hints of that with the Ohio couple that stood on their ground and defended their home with their guns. They're lucky that they didn't get more aggressive and take out some of these protesters and people that were assaulting them. In a sense, they would have had every right to, if they felt their lives were in danger, to defend themselves with lethal force. I think they showed extraordinary restraint. And again, the courts are going to, they're not even going to allow them to be charged with anything. That's what's coming. The victory that the Supreme Court is ultimately going to recognize the individual citizen has a right to keep and bear arms and defend against domestic terrorism. And the president and the government has declared these groups are domestic terrorists because they're destroying statues and they are engaging in the deprivation of rights of other citizens, and they're also engaged in massive looting and destruction of cities, and they're trying to also defund the police, which is the paramilitary civilian force that keeps law and order and the American internal society functioning. Jim?
And when they defund the police, what else can we do but defend ourselves? I thought they set an exemplary illustration of what you ought to do in a situation like that, and displayed extraordinary restraint, Scott. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And they've been offered replacement of their AR-15s by some 50 different sources who are all so supportive, because the police confiscated their weapons, which is completely outrageous, Scott. I expect there's going to be a lot more to come of this from a legal point of view, but that they will surely eventually prevail, as you observe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Meanwhile, Kanye West admits he still has an affinity for President Trump. He blasts racist Democratic Party narrative. To say the black vote is Democrat is a form of racism and white supremacy. In an interview with Forbes, Kanye West reveals that although he hasn't filed any paperwork, doesn't have a campaign structure in place, he's still planning to run for president. West won't be running as a Democrat or Republican, but instead running for president under the birthday party banner, because according to the black rapper, if he wins, it will be everybody's birthday. West told the Forbes reporter he's already chosen his running mate, Michelle Tidball, an obscure Wyoming preacher. Since he became a born-again Christian, West spends a great deal of time on his family farm in Wyoming. He had an explosive interview with a radio host, Big Boy, while promoting his new Christian-themed album. During the interview, he was asked about his support for Donald Trump. He explained he doesn't believe it's smart for Black Americans to vote as a bloc Democratic, claiming, "You are quite easily controlled if they know everybody going to be blue. If you go to a white bar, you're going to hear people talking independent. You got to hear people talking Democrat. You got to hear people talking Republican." In the 2016 presidential election, 88% of Black Americans voted Democrat, only 8% Republican. West went on to take a swipe at Democratic lawmakers, saying, "We're Black American brainwashed out here, bro. Come on, man. This is a free man talking. Democrats had us voting Democrats with food stamps for years. What are you talking about? Guns in the 80s, taking fathers out of the home, Plan B, lowering our votes, making us abort children." West infamously expressed his support for Trump last year, visiting the Republican president at the White House, donning a red "Make America Great Again" cap. Trump gave the media the opportunity to speak with him and with Jim Brown and why they support his presidency before the trio left the Oval Office for a scheduled launch. West explained to his leftist media why he decided to courageously speak out about his support for Trump and conservative solutions to age-old issues like gun violence in Chicago, mental health issues, prison reform, trade with China, and gun rights. That said, West clearly has affinity for Trump and did not deny that a run could be made to try to cleave votes away from Joe Biden. To say the black vote is Democrat is a form of racism and white supremacy. The Democratic Party is not going to be happy about this. Meanwhile, Joe Shapiro's wife says he never took the sats for Trump, that the pair didn't meet until after college. Mary Trump's claim in her book that President Trump paid his friend Joe Shapiro to take his sats conflict with specific timelines, according to Shapiro's widow, Pam. "My late husband, Joe, passed away 21 years ago. He was a man of great integrity, honesty, hard worker, literally the smartest person I ever met," she said in a video interview. "He went to the University of Pennsylvania, member of the class of 68. While at Penn, he met Donald Trump. They became friends. They loved the sport of golf. They shared the same hometown. They shared the same campus. They stayed in a little bit of touch through the years. But obviously, Joe's not here to defend himself and say what happened. I just want to recollect what he told me about where he met Trump. And I want to thank all of Joe's close friends and his sister Beth for our talks in the past 24 hours about what an outstanding man Joe was." The White House called the claim completely false. Mary Trump, Donald Trump's niece, in her forthcoming book, accused the president of being a sociopath and charged that his hubris and willful ignorance are a threat to the country.
Oh, wow.
She just made it up, Scott. She just made it up. How embarrassing is that?
Yeah, you're seeing again the issuance of fraudulent statements without any moral accountability, without any ethical dimensions whatsoever. I think this is, again, this is showing the tattering and the deterioration of much of this fabric in America. Jim?
Yes. And we actually have more about Mary Trump's book, which appears to be, a hatchet job.
Yep.
Here are 11 reasons not to trust her book. The new memoir by Donald Trump's niece purports to dish salacious and unflattering details about the president's childhood and family and business dealing, but the book may be more payback than expose. The 55-year-old trained clinical psychologist and daughter of Trump's eldest brother, Fred, had good reasons to dislike her famed uncle, including her contempt for his conservative politics. Here are 11 facts you may not know about the author of Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. What an absurd title. 1, Mary Trump has a strong political point of view, and it's not shared by her uncle. She's a registered Democrat. She's tweeted support for Hillary Clinton. She also endorses Black Lives Matter and the LGBTQ rainbow flag. 2, she was not happy Donald Trump was elected. Invited to her uncle's election night party in 2016, she declined out of fear she wouldn't be able to contain her euphoria when Clinton's victory was announced. When Trump won instead, she tweeted, "This is one of the worst nights of my life. What is wrong with this country? I fear the American experiment has failed." She has no idea who it was she was supporting, making claims like Hillary Clinton is an extraordinary human being in public service. Actually, lot to this is unspeakable, is completely ridiculous beyond words. 3, her own brother says the Trump family didn't take her wealth. Fred Trump III disputes his sister's claim that they were cut out of their grandfather's will, which resulted in an ugly lawsuit that was amicably stated. 4, she broke her ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Under the terms of the financial settlement, according to Fred Trump III, he and Mary signed a non-disclosure agreement we were more than willing to execute, all of which were approved and recommended by our attorneys and advisors. In my opinion, those provisions of the 2001 settlement agreement are still in effect and binding today, and I have continued to honor them, although it appears Mary has not. 5, many claims in her book are hearsay and not from firsthand sources. For example, the book purports that while a high school, Trump enlisted a smart kid with a reputation for being a good test taker to take his SAT for him and paid his buddy well, the friend being Joe Shapiro himself. He is not quoted, and we now have, of course, his wife denying it, that they didn't even know each other at the time. 6, Mary violated a basic rule of psychotherapy. She has a doctorate in psychology. She's a trained psychologist, states her uncle meets the criteria for antisocial personality disorder, but its most severe form is generally considered sociopathy, but can also refer to chronic criminality, arrogance, and disregard for others. This is blatantly unethical. Despite the diagnosis, the president has never been her patient. By offering a diagnosis, she violated the Goldwater rule, which states psychologists should not offer a diagnosis in the media of a living public figure they have not examined. 6, she appeared on national television to poke fun at her own book. She went on CBS TV's This Late Show with Stephen Colbert to unveil fake excerpts from her book, including, when he told me to pull his finger, he farted and blamed Obama another. Every time he brought home a new aunt, he'd say, "Don't get attached." 9, rush to public. National Review senior political correspondent Jim Garrity suggests the book is rushing to publication because its shelf life may be limited. The Washington Post notes that since Donald Trump announced his candidacy in 2015, Mary Trump does not appear to have said anything publicly about her. A cynic might conclude that Trump may be an ex-president on the afternoon of January 20th, and the opportunity to write a book like this and its market may dry up soon. I don't think there's a chance, unless massive cheating takes place, that Trump will not be reelected by a landslide. 9, is Mary Trump stumping for Joe Biden? That seems to be the suggestion of CNN media correspondent Brian Stelter, who labels her tome as essentially an anti-Trump campaign book. previewing portions of it on CNN, he said Joe Biden couldn't have written a more effective book against the president of the United States. 11 dead men and women tell no tales. The book quotes or paraphrases many people no longer able to speak for themselves. Mary Trump's father, Fred Trump Jr., died in 1981. Her grandparents, Fred Trump Sr. and Mary Ann McLeod Trump, died in 1999 and 2000, respectively. This looks like garbage. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, it is garbage, of course. This is a very wounded and damaged individual. Her father, Fred Trump, was an alcoholic and died, and no doubt engaged in abuse of all kinds of reprehensible manner against this woman, and caused her to become, deformed and alienated and traumatized in an internal psychological, emotional way, which probably explains the absence of any normal marital, family, sexual relationship. She's able to bond with a man. There's no relationships there. Her hysterical sexual schizophrenia, which is emblematic with the support of the LGBT rainbow flag and that whole sexual fascism, which is quickly morphing into not just a desire for tolerance or let us engage in our own sexual perversions and call it normal. Now they're trying to accelerate and lobotomize the American public with this sexual schizophrenia. You see that in many of the articles that are coming out, with lunatic bisexual or LGBTQ whatever, saying if a man doesn't want to have sex with another man that calls himself a woman, just because he's got penis, this is sexual discrimination or something like that. I mean, they're losing their minds, and this is what this woman denotes. She's lost her mind, and the only thing people need to do to quickly summarize exactly the garbage, this is absolutely pure garbage. Is simply looking at the first paragraph, which says her tweet about Hillary Clinton. What's wrong with this country? How come Hillary Clinton got in? The end of the American experiment, blah, blah, blah. Well, the American people reject that foolishness. They rejected her opinion. She's an idiot who's never served in the government or military, has never done a damn thing, but probably drunk herself into a coma. And now she's got the gall to stab her family in the back. Donald Trump's response should be, no comment. Everybody has family, issues, and that's not why I'm president. I'm here to run the country, and not even pay any attention to this woman. But it shows you, that the support for Hillary means she's a lunatic, and I think most people would agree with that. They'd simply go, yep. We did not vote for Hillary Clinton because she's a lunatic. She's a homicidal maniac. I personally know of all the Clinton Foundation, Department of Justice, Obama, pay-to-play scams using Covington and Burling and Union Bank of Switzerland and on and on. That's why I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, because she would have destroyed and ruined this country in the fires of war that she was setting from Ukraine to Syria to Libya. That's why we don't vote for that. But the other thing is, Jim, the best person that Trump can bring into his campaign is Tvni Trump, his daughter that just graduated from Georgetown. We've had enough of Ivanka and Jared. They need to be sent off onto their own little love boat cruise and let them be ambassadors like Harry and his wife or what. But get the hell out of the White House and give Tvni, the daughter, a chance to serve her father. And I'd say in an inspector general capacity, in some sort of an oversight where she's helping investigate the waste, fraud, and abuse that's being conducted in these agencies against her father. So Trump needs to, begin to shuffle his deck and his appointments, get rid of the old and start with the new. Jim?
Very, very interesting suggestion, Scott. Very appealing. And I agree, Ivanka and Jared have run the course. Meanwhile, we have Tom Friedman, who's just a pathetic political hack, suggesting Biden should not debate Trump unless here are two conditions a Democrat should set. Of course, Biden's brain damage. He couldn't withstand any kind of debate. They're trying to find all kinds of reasons and excuses for him not to debate, to keep him tucked away in the basement. Here's what Friedman writes. I worry about Joe Biden debating Donald Trump. He should do it under only two conditions. Otherwise, he's giving Trump unfair advantage. First, Biden should declare it take place in the debate only if Trump releases his tax returns for 2016 through 2018. Biden has already done so, and they are on his website. Trump must too. No more gifting Trump something he can attack while hiding his own questionable finances. And second, Biden should insist a real-time fact-checking team approved by both candidates be hired by the Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates, and that 10 minutes before the scheduled conclusion of the debate, this team report on any misleading statements, phony numbers, or outright lies either candidate has uttered. That way, no one in that massive television audience can go away easily misled. Debates always have ground rules. Why can't telling the truth and equal transparency on taxes be conditions for this one?
Yeah.
Because of COVID-19, Biden has been sticking close to home, wearing a mask and social distancing. And with the coronavirus now spreading further and Biden being a responsible individual and role model, right, it's likely he won't be able to engage with any large groups of voters before Election Day. Therefore, the three scheduled televised debates, which will garner huge audiences, will carry more weight for him than ever. He should not go into such high-stakes moments ceding any advantages to Trump. Trump is badly trailing in the polls, and he needs these debates much more than Biden does to win over undecided voters. So Biden needs to make Trump pay for them in the currency of transparency and fact-checking, universal principles that will level the playing field for him and illuminate and enrich the debates for all citizens. Meanwhile, Biden asserts absolutely he will cut police funding, says cops have become the enemy. You want further evidence of brain damage? Here it is. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden has drawn a line in the sand with law enforcement saying, yes, absolutely. He will divert funds from police because some have become the enemy. Biden made the comments in an interview with Eddie Barkan for Now This exclusive. To make Black Lives Matter, we need to redirect money away from police departments into mental health care, affordable housing, good jobs, and restorative justice. Barkan tweeted, I asked Joe Biden what he thinks about this approach. Biden's answer references police departments that use military surplus equipment in dealing with dangerous situations. Biden says police have become the enemy and calls for cutting police funding. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Though nuanced with his response in targeting military-grade levels of police protection, Biden's startling response shows the line separating him and anti-police extremists in his party no longer exists. Surplus military equipment for law enforcement, they don't need that, Biden claims. The last thing you need is an up-armored Humvee coming into a neighborhood. It's like the military invading. Following his call to defund the police, Biden then tackled prisons. One of the things we also need to be doing, the former vice president said, is fundamentally changing the way we deal with our prison system. It should be a rehabilitation system, not a punishment system. Bear in mind, he made these comments in the wake of rioting, looting, and tragic murders taking place across the country because criminals feel emboldened with no repercussions for their actions. Biden clearly is accepting the positions previously only held by party extremists. This is your new norm in the Democratic Party. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, the new norm of the Democratic Party is certainly quickly devolving into the new fascism. Friedman is, as you said, Jim, a terrible hack. He's of course, he knows full well that Joe Biden doesn't possess any mental clarity anymore, that he's disintegrating under the weight of his own dementia and Alzheimer's. The Democrats, of course, know that too. And you know, this claim to not debate Trump for these infantile sort of reasons will only further disgust the American public towards people like Friedman and the Democrat Party, and anybody who has the gall to say you can be president, Joe Biden, and you don't have to answer to the American people their questions. You don't have to tell them anything. You don't have to show them where you stand on things and compare yourself to Donald Trump on the same stage. It's not for the candidates' benefits, it's for the American public. It's not for the media that conduct these debates, it's for the American public. And after Labor Day, that's when people get serious. And of course, the independents determine the elections. So the last 2 weeks of the year, the last 2 weeks before the election, the independents determine who they're going to vote for. And it's all based on feelings. The independents don't have political, economic, social philosophy. They have feelings. That's how they determine who they vote. Well, who's nice? Who do I feel safe with? Who's got it together? And it's Donald Trump compared to Joe Biden. So the independents, that's just the political reality of who they are. And this asinine claim and theory that you can just avoid and hide in the shadows and then pop out like a clown in a box to become president. I mean, these people are a laughing stock. But the only thing Donald Trump needs to do to win is to show the video footage of the Democrats being Democrats. Joe Biden being a stumbling imbecile who says, well, all men created equal, and you know the thing. You know how it goes. The thing called the Constitution, or I'm Joe Biden, I'm running for Senate. Oh, I mean president. And you know, all of this stuff should make Americans shake their head with shame, and that's what it'll come to. But again, I suspect that Joe Biden will be assassinated, and someone will replace him, and they're going to probably assassinate him with someone who is a Russian pro-Trump individual, because then they get two whack-a-moles at the same time. I don't think they're going to kill him with COVID. They have to kill him with some sort of Manchurian candidate scenario.
Wow.
So they can guilt trip the population into not showing up and voting for Democrat as a do it for the Gipper kind of thing. I honestly think that's the only way that's the last card in the Democrats' hand, is the assassination of Joe Biden, blaming it on someone in Trump, and hoping that by the skin of their teeth, they're going to be a couple votes over the poll, and they're going to get in. As crazy as that sounds, and as horrible, and as, of course, we don't want that to ever happen. We're analysts, Jim, so we're being honest, and I personally think that's what they're going to do, because Joe Biden doesn't have a hope in hell to win this if you put him on the stage and have his flubbering, drunken, stupid behavior complemented by his son, the criminal, who's extorting and getting money from Ukraine and China, and then the gang of criminals who are up there tearing down statues, burning police cars, killing cops, defunding the police, trying to accelerate this country into a civil war. You instantly find massive block of the country population, which I would say is 65 to 70%, are going to be on the side of Donald Trump because of these just crazy behaviors and attitudes and meltdown of the Democrat Party and their leaders. And in a sense, it should be looked at as a blessing, because they are being turned into Nebuchadnezzar. They are going out, the Democrats are going out into the field and eating grass for 7 years because they have turned themselves over to such wickedness with abortion and lesbian, transgender, gay agenda, this, and all of the corruption, the perversion that we have infected this country with by Democrats. They're being turned over to the fruits of their own wickedness, and this madness is a symptom. Jim?
I think you have a very tantalizing conjecture there about assassinating Joe Biden, because he can't possibly succeed as a candidate. He's cognitively incompetent. He's clearly brain damaged. They are already running very effective commercials against Biden. There are at least two, one in which, as a young man, he's boasting about being so smart, having earned 3 degrees and all this other stuff, being in the top half of his law school class. Turns out everything he claimed on that occasion was false. So they just show him making the claims, and then you have one of the classic news anchors of the time just going through each one and debunking it. Even my wife, who is very strongly left, thought it was a good and effective commercial against Biden. Even my wife.
Yeah. can I? Oh, no.
Yeah, Don, sure, go
I
ahead.
was going to say there's also a commercial out that just came out today about Trump being the worst criminal in history, or worst, most crooked one in history. It goes for about 58 seconds, showing how crooked Trump is with well, and his associates, with Stone and Manafort and things. And then it has 2 seconds showing a guy named Biden at the very end as being the answer. Of course, there's no corruption or anything wrong with the Biden and Obama administration or anything. So, what kind of choice are they given anyway?
You're saying it's a ridiculous and implausible commercial, right?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, now this is fascinating. This is going back to February 11th of 2017. This is the time of the inauguration. How Obama was already scheming to sabotage Trump's presidency already. When former President Barack Obama said he was heartened by anti-Trump protests, he was sending a message of approval to his troops. Troops, yes. Obama has an army of agitators numbering more than 30,000 who will fight his Republican successor at every turn of his historic presidency. And Obama will command them from a bunker less than 2 miles from the White House.
Wow.
Meanwhile, Joe Biden's family racks up arrests for drugs, drunk driving, but no jail time. In August 2019, Carolyn Biden, 33, and niece of former Vice President Biden, was busted in Lower Marion Township, Pennsylvania, for driving under the influence and without a license, public records show. While the case is active, it's unlikely Carolyn will face much in the way of consequences if history and Biden family rap sheets are any guide. Meanwhile, Biden caught on a hot mic when he says, "Wow, disgusting." This was when Chris Cruz was sworn in as a senator from Delaware, and Biden leaned down to his daughter and said, and I heard him say it at the time, "Do you have any idea how horny I am to have a 13-year-old girl standing next to me? That's going to make a nice commercial." Meanwhile, if the Democrats are doing so well, how come Reader-Supported News, which is a very left-wing organization, is running out of money? They're practically begging for money, begging for money. That would make no sense at all if Biden really were in the lead. Meanwhile, Dr. Robert Epstein has warned us Google will shift 10% of voters to make Trump a blip in history. Dr. Robert Epstein, a senior research psychologist at the American Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology, joined Breitbart News editor-in-chief on Breitbart News Daily to discuss how Google hopes to shift 10% of the voting public away from Trump to fulfill a company executive stated goal of making populism nothing more than a blip in history. This is from 10 July 2020, just the past few days. Meanwhile, and this is very, very telling, the left controls every major institution in America: mainstream media, the academy, administrative government, Hollywood, big tech, etc. So if institutional racism really did exist, whose fault would that be? Michael Knowles. Scott, your thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you made a very good point, Jim, with Joe Biden leaning down to a 13-year-old daughter of a congressman saying, "Do you have any idea how horny I am to have a 13-year-old girl standing next to me?" That needs to be made into a commercial, especially given the context of the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell sexual prostitution ring and the entrapment of U.S. politicians and media and business people in child underage girl sexual voyeurism that the Israeli Mossad, of course, were participating in. This is the commercial that needs to be seen by women, mothers who think they're Democrats, saying, "Oh, really? You're a mother? Then what do you say about Joe Biden leading down to your 13-year-old daughter saying, you have any idea how horny I am to have you standing next to me? Are you going to sell your daughter to this Joe Biden lascivious rapist? Because you know it's just a matter of time and they're all into this pedophilia, Biden and all the rest of them." You saw Jeff Sessions swat away Biden's hand as he tried to titillate and tickle one of the little girls that was on the podium. This sort of thing needs to come out. And you've got Trump on the Epstein plane as well. There's connections to him and Epstein and that. But Biden really needs to be shown in all of his lasciviousness, these statements that are caught on tape, caught on video, and it needs to be said. Joe Biden is a child molester. Joe Biden molests children. What we mean by that is by saying things like this: "Do you know how horny I am to have a 13-year-old girl next to me?" That's a child molester, a pedophile, trying to openly abuse a young girl. This is the man who wants to be president. And I knew people that were in Iraq when I was in the Bush administration that talked about Biden when he flew over there on military planes, getting off, stinking like scotch, and trying to, in one girl in particular that I knew very well, grope and kiss and fondle her. I mean, just tried to kind of just get inside of her clothes when he got off the plane and came to Iraq. So this guy is a drunken molester, and he needs to be branded as such. Jim?
Yeah, I think it's completely revolting, Scott.
Yeah.
One final thought: tomorrow night, actually tonight, so it may be too late for those who receive this message, I'm going to do an interview with Jack Mullen, the threat posed, well, tomorrow night, the threat posed by Antifa, BLM, and the progressive left. Jack has a very sober assessment of what's going on here. It's not all flattering to Donald Trump. He and I have a divergent point of view, but I think it's very important to hear what he has to say, because it'll sober you up if you didn't think the situation we're in is extremely serious. That's on the FETS Presents, which occurs Tuesdays and Thursdays at jimtheconspiracyguy.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Central Time. And Scott, you are my very first guest on the FETS Presents with an absolutely sensational interview. I can't thank you enough. It was really wonderful, my friend.
Well, these are the great times when Donald Trump needs men of truth and conviction and experience, and I think he's getting that. I think the American public are waking up there, and the media and the left are really imploding onto themselves. They really are devouring themselves. It's like the old emblem of the dragon eating itself, eating its own tail. That's what the left is doing. All of their antics and their mayhem and their chaos and their violent, narcissistic bigotry and racism and hysteria, all of that is going to cause them to just implode like a black hole, and it's driving all decent people to the side of Donald Trump. Jim?
Scott, I've just been dumbfounded at the disintegration of the Democratic Party into a Marxist communist entity. I mean, I would never have expected this in my lifetime. I voted Democrat very frequently in my life. I voted for Bill Clinton twice. I voted for Barack Obama twice. I, in retrospect, realized the tremendous damage they wreaked on the country, but frankly, the alternatives were completely unappealing. Figures like Mitt Romney and John McCain, I could never have brought myself to vote for them. And now, however, when it came to Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, to me, it was a no-brainer. Trump was fresh, invigorating, coming from the private sector, not contaminated by having been in the swamp. And I think that was a great appeal of him for most Americans. When he talked about draining the swamp and putting America first, we could actually envision him doing that. And while I grant that there are photographs of Epstein with Trump, they appear to have been ones where Epstein was visiting Mar-a-Lago, for example. And if he ever did fly on the plane, I doubt very much that he was inclined to indulge in what Epstein was providing. I believe he's an upright and moral man, notwithstanding occasional remarks he's made when he was a rich and famous playboy. He's had his pick of beautiful women his whole life. He's married to a fabulous woman today. And I believe that he is really sincere and dedicated about getting rid of the pedophiles in government, of whom there appears to be a nearly endless list, including many prominent Democrats, which I believe is one reason why they're fighting so desperately, willing to destroy the country to preserve their political control, because they know that they themselves are on the list for being held to account for the past grotesque offenses, some of which are lurid and sadistic and vicious beyond imagination.
And let me just say, Jim, too, this is what needs to be opened up for the next 3 months between now and the election day. Michael Flynn and Roger Stone need to hit the ground running in August and be this barnstorming, group that's going out there telling the American citizen in a very angry, righteously angry way, furious about what has been done to them. Because the American public won't buy it any other way. You can't just go up there and say, "Yeah, it was painful. I'm sad, and I was wronged, and I feel bad, and what do I do now?" This sort of weak response will not hold water. Flynn and Trump have to go out there. I mean, Flynn and Stone have to go out there in separate ways. Flynn can't be close to Stone because Stone is like a little bit of a clown, but Flynn has gravitas. He's even if he doesn't have it in certain ways, he has it by his badge, by his rank, by his credentials and resume. And he needs to go out there and say, the American people will know the truth, and these bastards have attacked me and lied and engaged in the greatest crimes that this country has ever experienced, and I'm going to make it all known. That's why they came after me. And that's what we're going to expose. And he needs to name the pedophilia. He needs to throw down the molestation videos and any other material that's been acquired on the laptop of Anthony Weiner. They need to go on the full assault and expose all of this stuff that's been done. And Flynn is in a position to say, my lawyers at Covington and Burling betrayed me because they were in bed with the Obama administration and Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer and Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation. This law group, unbeknownst to me at the time, were totally engaged in crimes. The more he does that, the more the American people will wake up and come on the side of Trump.
And I believe in there are different ways they can do a great deal of good for the president. Flynn is an upright, principled military officer with a vast understanding of intelligence. That's why they had to get him out. He would have done Trump too much good. Roger Stone, a political operative. He takes no prisoners. Believe me, he's capable of wreaking revenge, and they're not going to like the consequences. Scott, I can't thank you enough for today. Don, take us out.
Oh, yeah. And I will say also, there's a guy named Robert David Steele who did a great little interview recently, and he predicted or hopes that Trump would get a new vice presidential candidate. How about Cynthia McKinney? I think that would be dynamite. I think that would be great. And so, yes, we want to thank you very much for watching the show here. And by the way, Jim Fetch has got some great books, and a new study about Sandy Hook is coming out as well that shows real crime.
It's about the lawsuit, Don. It's about the lawsuit.
Yeah. So yeah. It's all happening here, folks. And so we really want to thank you so much for watching Truth versus News here on July 13th. So thank you so much. Share this widely because we're no longer on TV for a while, and it's just something else. The truth is something else, and so why can't places like Facebook and other places like this stand it? Because, well, there's something wrong in America, folks, and we're trying to correct it. So stand with us. Thank you much.
It seems to be rare that an asymptomatic person actually transmits onward to a secondary individual.
I didn't quite get that. Can I hear that one more time? I'm serious. I could not tell what you just said.
From the data we have, it still seems to be rare that an asymptomatic person actually transmits onward to a secondary individual.
Still didn't quite get that, but Dr. Samadi went to medical school. He's been listening to doctors all of his life. Doctor, I believe the headline from the World Health Organization is asymptomatic people are not infectious. They're not going to spread the disease. Is that what the WHO is saying?
Yes, that's correct, Greg. Look, you and I have been going at this since February of this year. We've covered more than hundreds of these segments on Newsmax TV. The most important segment about what we're going to be talking about COVID is probably tonight, because they're taking a 360-degree turn, and WHO is announcing, and this is a big news, that asymptomatic people out there are not contagious. Remember, because we didn't know who would be passing this virus or not, we made everybody do something called social distancing. This is a new word that you've heard of it, and it came to our life a few months ago. We made everybody across the board to wear masks. At the beginning, we said if you have symptoms, you wear the mask to protect others, and then we gave in because CDC and everybody kept changing back and forth. We also made everybody to go for testing. We need 300 million tests the next day, or else we cannot reopen our country. And guess what? This thing, this is very important. It's a breaking news that if you are not symptomatic and you don't have any symptoms of fever, chills, shortness of breath, or any of those symptoms we've spoken about, the risk of passing it on to other people and being contagious is very rare. And studies like this comes from a very accurate tracing in countries like Singapore, contact tracing, and it's too bad that these researchers are not, the papers are not making it to Lancet, and mainstream media is not covering to the extent. This is probably one of the biggest news that we've had since coronavirus outbreak.
Data we have, it still seems to be rare that an asymptomatic person actually transmits onward to a secondary individual.
This report is based on Amazing Polly's recent video, Is This Torture? In her video, Polly examines Amnesty International's 1973 report on torture and how it seems to reflect the current response to COVID-19. According to Amnesty International's report, torture is the systematic and deliberate infliction of acute pain in any form by one person on another in order to accomplish the purpose of the former against the will of the latter. The report then uses Biederman's chart of coercion to describe the technique. Psychologist Albert Biederman studied communist Chinese tactics known as DDD, debility, dependency, and dread. The CIA has been trained to use debility, dependency, and dread. And according to their 1983 Human Resource Exploitation Training Manual, many psychologists consider the threat of inducing debility to be more effective than debility itself. With DDD, the debilitated victim becomes dependent upon the torturer and develops a strong fear of anything vague or unknown. Biederman's chart of coercion lays out the design of DDD. Does any of this sound familiar? Number 1, isolation. We see this with quarantines and social distancing and the prohibition of crowds and large gatherings. Number 2, monopolization of perception. Corporate mainstream media has monopolized all of pop culture, and those on social media who challenge the mainstream narrative are censored. Also listed is restricted movement and monotonous food. Number 3, induced debilitation and exhaustion. Gym closures, church closures, losing your job, school closings, and wearing masks all day long increase stress and provokes exhaustion and debilitation. Number 4, threats. We are threatened that our own children may be taken away from our homes and that experimental forced vaccines are coming. We are told that more will die if we restart America. And we are threatened with tracking chips, contact tracing, and a new normal. Number 5, occasional indulgences. Here we find fluctuations of interrogators' attitudes, such as BLM protests are good, Trump rallies are bad. Walmart is okay, but small businesses are not. The torturer will provide occasional indulgences such as rewards for partial compliance. If you just wear a mask, someday we can return to normal. Number 6, demonstrating omnipotence and omniscience. Shutting down the entire global economy was a pretty good demonstration of omnipotence. Huge fines and jail for people not wearing a mask. We see the omniscience with Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, and other official experts. Number 7 is degradation, being called non-essential or a science denier, being treated as ignorant fools and called names by celebrities for not complying. Number 8, enforcing trivial demands. This final step develops habits of compliance. Enforcement of minute rules such as standing 6 feet apart, following arrows, and showing support for violent BLM protests. Also, according to the report on torture, many victims become ill as a result of coercion, and more than half the illnesses listed in the report can be easily diagnosed as COVID-19, according to CDC guidelines. Do you really think that this is all a coincidence? Or are the people of the world being subjected to an advanced form of torture, coercion, and mind control? For Infowars.com, this is Greg Reese.